Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So I'm back after a while, and yeah, it's been a nice break I've had away from making videos and stuff. I've still been playing PoE, but yeah, I just lost a lot of motivation to make content. I was a bit burnt out, but feeling a lot better now. So yeah, we're here with this Exsang build. It's Ruetoo's Poison Exsang. I've been playing it for a little bit. I was playing a private league, and then we migrated out and decided to try out some builds that that we were too limited in the private league. So we decided to branch out, and yeah, this is one of the builds I was trying to play in the private league, but I only had one Ming's Heart, and getting the damage for the build was very difficult. So yeah, um, I don't know. It's been really fun. If you think this my damage is a little low here, it is because we have Enfeeble on the map and we have more monster life, and we're also running Daily Mirror, and it actually gets really difficult near the end, like the monster's HP and the damage you take. So I think this is a pretty good representation of the build. I've invested about 40 divines now, but it was still doing like what you can see in this video pretty similarly at a 20 divine budget. The only difference is that I got like awakened gems and I got a new amulet and stuff like that. But otherwise, it's just really strong for a really small amount of gear that you need for this build. But there are a few things that you may run into that I want to cover in the video as well. So yeah, I just want you guys to see the boss damage too. But yeah, this has just been really smooth. I really recommend giving this build a try, guys, and it's pretty good for Delhi or Expedition. I was running for a while, but I just got a bit bored of Expedition, so I stopped doing it. So I just wanted you guys to see the boss damage here on Omni, or whatever it's called. And yeah, remember, this is probably about 80 to 100% Delirious equivalent now, so just keep in mind that it's actually, doing pretty good damage despite that, and of course the mods of the map. But yeah, it's been really fun. Again, I really recommend you guys try this build out, and I'm gonna cover some things that you might run into, because there's definitely some problems that you can run into and solutions for those problems as well. So yeah, let's get right into it. Alright guys, so I just want to put a disclaimer that this isn't really a build guide, but it's more of a overview and a bit of solutions, just a bit all mixed up in one. So I don't really have a build guide for this. I can leave the Ruetoo POB, but he doesn't really have a build guide for this either. So yeah, I will explain things a little bit, but I don't want the video to drag on too long, because yeah, otherwise we could be going on for ages here. So yeah, I guess we'll start with the gear, and then we'll go into the links and the flasks, and we'll just go one by one like that. So first we have the Cold Iron Point. This is a really good unique dagger, and it's pretty hard to beat, but you definitely can beat it. But I'm not really bothered to craft anything at the moment, and I'm not really sure how to craft something better than this at this point. I'd have to look into that. But yeah, we have a decent tree. It's not the best, so this node is useless. We've got some attack speed, which is also pretty much useless. It only helps like with shield charge attack speed, which doesn't really matter. But we have poison duration, which is really nice, and it also has a downside, but this downside is kind of mitigated by our chaos res, so we don't need to worry too much about that. And then we also have minimum frenzy. We don't use any endurance charges anyway, so getting the -1 max doesn't matter. And then minimum frenzy is actually a huge damage increase, because it gives us the more damage multiplier, and it also gives us some cast speed, which is really nice on the build. And something you'll notice on this build is that you're going to want as much cast speed as possible, not only for damage, but purely just to make the build feel really smooth. You're going to need cast speed, otherwise it's going to feel very clunky. So you guys need to make sure you get cast speed as much as possible on this build. Next up, we have the helmet. Now this helmet is almost perfect. It's just missing life regen. You really want life regen on this build, because you'll see here, if you spam it enough, with the amount of cast speed we have, we actually lose a lot of HP. And on a boss, it can feel very uncomfortable. But for mapping, it's not a problem at all, even if you have no regen, because we have some life gain on kill, which is from this 2%, and we also have Cannibalistic Rite Anointed, which gives another 2% if you spent life recently, which we always are spending life. So we've got 4% life on kill, which makes mapping feel very, very smooth, but you still want life regen because otherwise bossing will feel like a big problem. And I did like Uber Elder and I did Maven on this build, and it was okay. It was a bit uncomfortable, but I was able to do both of them deathless, no problem, to get my Void Stones. So yeah, what you're looking for here is suppression. You're looking for some res if you can. Even though we're using Flasks to help our res, you still need some res on your gear. And this intelligence, I don't actually need it. You just need to make sure you have above 150 intelligence so you get the poison duration from Dendrobate. But other than that, you don't really need the intelligence. I just happen to have this on this helmet. So yeah, and you also want to make sure you have physical damage from hits taken as element. You need the craft and you need an implicit. It's very important because we have no physical mitigation on this build other than these implicits. So, and Taste of Hate. So yeah, it's pretty rough, and the way we deal with most physical damage is evasion, and obviously we don't have any way to mitigate physical spells, but there isn't too much of that in the game. So yeah, the main thing to worry about is like physical attacks, and we actually have like 93% evade chance, so we don't need to worry about that too much. But yeah, you do still want as much physical mitigation as you can get, which is, you know, mainly from the helmet and Taste of Hate in our case. So yeah, next off we have the shield. It's pretty simple. It's got suppress, and it's got life, and it's got some res, and it's got some regen. Now, something you guys might struggle with is actually capping your element avoid. So something you need to be careful of is, you can see we have 105%, but something you need to be careful of, because we are using Ancestral Vision, which helps our element avoid. We're using Revenge of the Hunted, which gives you suppress on full life. So something you need to keep in mind is when you're not on full life, you still want this to be capped. Otherwise, you're going to have a situation where you're like, if you're fully relying on Revenge of the Hunted, which isn't reliable since you're always using your HP, you're going to be at like 95% and or 90%, and that's going to feel horrible because sometimes you're going to be like, why am I not, you know, element immune here? And then it's just really, you know, bad, especially with stuff like Shock Ground, to not have 100% immunity. So yeah, make sure when you're not full HP that you still have full avoidance, and it's just something to make sure you look out for. So yeah, you can go for some avoid on the shield if you're finding it difficult to cap it. And also I went for avoid on the boots. I just find that this helped me cap it easier. So yeah, that's what I would recommend. But the shield is pretty basic, right? But you do want to make sure you go for a high amount of evasion, because evasion is most of our defense on this build, or a lot of it in any case. So you do want to make sure you have a high amount of evasion on it if you can. But yeah, don't worry about it too much. If you're like on a lower budget and you can't get a shield with a lot of evasion, you can go lower on it, but still make sure you have a decent amount on it, like maybe 500-600, something like that. Okay, next we got the amulet. We got this is actually not too expensive to make. So the base, I actually bought the wrong base. You actually want strength because we're really struggling on strength, and we had to get strength on our belt instead, which was actually really bad, or a really high roll of strength on our belt, which was really annoying. But yeah, what you want to do for this, you can get like a fractured base. This is like a really cheap option. You can definitely make better amulets, but this is what I went for. I didn't need any res on it. So you get a fractured fizz base, and you just use the Essence of Zeal on it for cast speed, and then I qualitied it to give it a bit more cast speed. And then you're looking for life, of course. And then I crafted Minimum Frenzy because I didn't need any resists, and it's a really strong suffix to have. So that's what I would recommend over there. Next off, we have the rings. So both rings I got here are just slightly below the highest roll because it was a lot cheaper, and at the time I was kind of just trying to make a budget version of the build. So yeah, go for as high roll as you can on the physical as extra chaos, and then you want to catalyst it using the Noxious Catalyst, I believe they're called. And you want to make sure you have 20% quality because it actually increases the gain as extra a lot, which is a large part of the damage of the build. So make sure you guys are qualitying those, very, very important. Next, of course, we have Dendrobate. Now, you don't actually need this corrupt, of course, but it makes a big difference. and I would recommend getting it if you can afford it. Now, it's actually cheaper to buy the Corrupt and then use Tainted Fusings and Jewelers to link it yourself than to actually buy it pre-made like I have. So I actually, made it myself with the fusings and the tainted stuff, and it worked out to be about 2 divines cheaper than actually buying it myself. And I think I had like not the greatest RNG. Like, I didn't instantly 6-sync it with the tainted fusings. It took me a few attempts, and it was still cheaper. So I'd still recommend buying it without the 6-sync and then making it yourself. Makes a lot better. Next, we have gloves. These are just essential. I wouldn't use anything else unless you're bossing, or Asanas Gentle Touch. Now, even if you're bossing, you still need a way to apply temp chains, because temp chains is a large part of your damage as well. So make sure that you are getting temp chains if you're not using these gloves. They're just absolutely important to have temp chains on the enemy. So yeah. Now, the main reason these gloves are good, of course, are for the explode. I don't think there's much to explain here, but yeah, it just helps with mapping a lot. Next up, we have the belt. This belt is not hard to make at all, especially if you have the fracture. You can even buy these type of belts for not even that expensive, like without the fracture, just with all the rolls you want. So I would look into that. Now, I went for Flask Effect Duration because I badly wanted the full uptime on my Onslaught Flask, and I had to do like some Legion Jewel tech as well to actually get 100% uptime on my Onslaught Flask, which is kind of annoying, but it is what it is. But yeah, I found that this belt really helps me because it caps my strength here. And obviously, if you guys can cap your strength in a different way, definitely do it, because taking up a suffix here sucks. I believe you can get stuff like Flask Effect as a suffix. I don't know if it's actually a suffix or a prefix, I can't remember. But yeah, you can just get more desirable mods. Like here, I don't have life regen, which would have been really nice, but I don't have it here. So I would recommend that role as well. And then we finally got boots. So make sure you get implicits right. Now, you can go for a life regen implicit if you've got your elemental ailment avoid capped already. And then the action speed one, you can just use the lesser ones over here. And you don't need to use any higher unless you want like 5%. But make sure like you just use the lesser one instead of the greater one for the 4%, because it's exactly the same. So yeah. And then here, you know what? I think I just pre-bought these boots without the implicits because it was just really cheap. But yeah, I think it was like 50C or something, maybe 100C. But yeah, it's got move speed, some res, life regen, life, and some evasion rating. So make sure you're looking for evasion rating and life regen if you can on these pieces of gear. And I got a bit of suppress because I was lacking it. So yeah, I think actually I'm not lacking the suppress, but I got the suppress to help with the ailment avoid. Yeah, something like that. I can't remember. But yeah. Okay, now the flasks. Now the flasks are actually really, really important to understand. So we got the silver flask here, and the reduced charges per use is a very good roll. And alternatively, you can use a increased charge recovery one. I find them to be very similar, but just make sure, obviously both rolls are T1. Just comparing the T1 rolls, of course. Now, the increased charge recovery is slightly better, but I don't actually need it, so that's why I'm trying to sell it here. But yeah, use when full. Okay, so something you could do if you're really, really down bad on flask charges, like if you want perma Onslaught Flask and you can't get as much flask gain as I have, what you can try is use when at the end of effect, and then that would make it so you just have to press your flask once every map. But it might actually help you sustain it a little bit better, because this way you're waiting for it to fill up. I just found that switching it that way actually can make it sustain, so you need to try it out if you're really struggling with that. But in my case, I don't want to do that, because every time I've set up my flasks like that, I always forget to press them sometimes, or like I just forget to press them sometimes, and it's just been a real headache, because especially when you're relying on them for like resists. So yeah, next we have the Divine Life Flask. This is just a basic one, anti-bleed with life instantly. Now, I actually like the one with 50% of recovery instead of the fully instant one, because I just find it to be generally better recovery over time than just the instant one, which you pop it and then you gain like a little fraction of life and then you're done unless you spam it. But I find this one to be a lot more smoother, so I just use this one. And you really, really need anti-bleed. mainly because Corrupting Blood is a big problem. Now, if you have Corrupting Blood elsewhere, then that's great. But if you don't, you're really going to need this, because with Exsang, you clear like 2 or 3 packs sometimes, and they all have this Corrupting Blood buff. And if you don't notice, you will get insta-killed by it because you don't have a way to mitigate the damage that you're gaining from it. So I really would, recommend the Anti-Bleed Flask. Okay, so this is a really important part. So you got your elemental flasks over here. Now these flasks aren't very hard to sustain as permanently as onslaught flasks, because they have less charges used per use and stuff like that. So it's a lot easier to sustain. But the problem is when you're using increased effect, reduced duration. Now sustaining this mod is actually very difficult, and if you can't sustain it yet, just drop the increased effect. But do keep in mind, if you drop the increased effect on the reduced mana cost here, you're not going to be able to cast haste without Eldritch Battery, which will require you to basically spec into Eldritch Battery for 3 points. And talking about sustaining your Divine Blessing without using Eldritch Battery, you also really, really need these alt qualities on your Inspiration and Divine Blessing, because right now I have my haste costs like very little mana. You can see it only costs like, oh, it shouldn't have costed anything there. I don't know why it did, but yeah, it costs no mana or 32 mana, whatever. I don't know why. Oh, the difference is the flask effect from Alchemist Genius. That's what it is. But yeah, 32 mana allows me to cast it at 54 mana. So that's something you need to keep in mind. And if you're able to get flask effect on your belt, then that will actually make your haste cost 0 mana. But because I have Alchemist Genius proccing sometimes, it's not always 0 mana. So yeah, and Alchemist Genius does give flask effect. So yeah, this is something to keep in mind. If you can't sustain it, just drop the increased effect and use Eldritch Battery, because it's very hard to sustain or like to get enough mana to cast haste without Eldritch Battery otherwise. And you always have enough energy shield to cast it with the reduced cost, because Dendrobate gives some ES, so you don't need to worry about that. And you can just use the default qualities, like just normal Divine Blessing, normal Inspiration, and your mana cost will be a lot higher, but you'll have Eldritch Battery and a huger energy shield pool to actually cast it. So that's just something really important that you guys need to understand. And if you can't get that, just make sure you use Eldritch Battery, and that's how it is. Finally, Taste of Hate. Really important. You only care about the physical damage taken. You don't care about the gain, but I just happen to get one with a good roll on the gain anyway. So make sure you get this flask if you can. If you can't at the moment and it's too expensive, just use a normal Sapphire flask and roll something useful on it. Maybe reduce effect of curses or something of that kind. Also, I forgot to mention, make sure you get increased evasion rating on one of your flasks, your elemental flasks, because they'll be up all the time, and it's very, very important to have this stat on there. Okay, so those are the flasks sorted. Now I'm just going to go into the gem links. We got Despair. You do want quality on this because it gives you increased effect, and you can also go for the alt quality. That gives a bit more damage, I think. And then you got Arcane Surge on Flame Dash and Despair, and we're actually self-casting Despair, and we only really self-cast this on a boss. We'll never ever self-cast this generally. So yeah, we do enough damage to deal with the mobs to not have to cast it on every pack. Flame Dash, of course, just for extra movement when we can't shield charge somewhere, or you can combine it with shield charge and it feels pretty smooth. So I would use Flame Dash, especially for like Maven or for Exarch. You really, really need it in those phases. Next, we have our Haste. We're using Val Haste on left click because I don't really like to press Val Haste actively. I can't be bothered for that, so I just put it on left click and it just procs randomly. And we have Divergent Inspiration. It helps reduce the mana cost. Now these are pretty pricey, so keep in mind you might want to run the Eldritch Battery setup instead before you can get these, and then increase duration. Quick tip, you can actually take this out to reduce the mana cost a little bit. As you can see, it goes to 26 and it was 32 before, so it does reduce the cost, but it's a huge QOL having the increased duration because we have 23 seconds instead of however long it would be, 15 seconds, which is a huge difference, right? Like in terms of smoothness and reprocking it feels better to have the duration, of course. But of course, if you can't afford to run that yet, it's fine. Next, we have faster attacks on shield charge. You do want quality on faster attacks because it increases the attack speed of shield charge as well. And then we have Anomalous Withering Step. Now, you only really use this in weird scenarios. So when I was doing Expedition, I would like shoot out once, Withering Step into the enemies because I don't really want to stand there and shoot like this because Expedition's kind of rippy. But you don't really need to use Withering Step that much. I don't really find myself using it that much. Maybe if I first see a boss and I want to instantly apply my Wither on them because we don't have... I mean, we have a way to Wither on hit, but it takes a while to ramp it up, right? But with using Withering Step, it applies it a certain amount of stacks instantly, which is pretty good. So you could use it if you want, but if you don't, I don't think it's a big deal. I just found it useful for the scenarios like an Expedition because it also gives phasing that you can just run through the mobs and get to a safer location and shoot again, right? So it's up to you if you want to use that. Next, we have Herald of Agony. We don't need the ult quality here because we're running Dendrobate. We have a lot of chance to poison on our Exsang already, so we don't really care about the ult quality on Herald of Agony. Next, we have Malevolence, of course, Enlighten, level 3. Kind of really need it. Say, for example, your mana cost is just not enough. Like, it's a bit too high. You could go for an Enlighten 4 as well if you want, but I wouldn't really recommend that. It's actually cheaper to just sort your setup up, like with the Flask and the Flask gain, than to get an Enlighten 4. So yeah, and then we've got Grace, which is a huge amount of our defenses. On here you can see it says 88%, but we're actually at 93%. If you check on PoB, our EFA chance is basically capped, and it's pretty good. It feels very, very smooth. You'll barely notice getting hit, and it's really nice. So finally, we have Steel Skin on cast when damage taken. If you'd prefer, you can actually take off this cast when damage taken and put it on left click if you want. But yeah, I don't really... Yeah, it's up to you. And then finally, we've got Dread Banner. You do want quality on this because it gives you effect of aura, and it's really nice to complement your evasion. So if you can see here, if we take it out, our evasion would actually drop. So on the tooltip, the reason why is because the way this works is that it lowers the enemy accuracy rating and it's not calculating that. But on PoB, you'll see that it's making pretty substantial difference. Okay, guys, so that is everything covered. There is an extra slot here. Now, if you find yourself going into... if you're doing like 8-mod maps, for example, and you find yourself getting into like no regen maps a lot, what you can do is actually run life tap on some things if you want, like on your movement skill, for example, and stuff. But I don't know if I could recommend it because no regen feels horrible on this build, so I wouldn't recommend it. But if you really need to run one, you can run life tap on something like a movement skill or on something else if you need to. But yeah, I wouldn't really recommend that. So finally, we'll go into the tree. I guess we'll start off with the Ascendancy. We've got Master Toxicist. It's pretty good, of course. It gives you the Poison Prolif. And then you've got the Wither on hit, and Effect of Withered, which is the important part. Actually gives you a lot of damage. You've got the Flask gain 3 every seconds, which is really important. And then you've got Increased Effect, which is also really, really important. So the build is not going to feel good unless you have all these nodes. Like if you're early on, you only have like 3rd lab, and the build feels really bad, that's completely normal. I went through that phase as well, and I actually leveled the build up to like level 80 or level 85 with Toxic Rain, and then I switched to Exsang, because before that Exsang felt unbearable. So yeah, there's not too much to explain on this tree, but yeah, I'll just give you a quick overview. We're using this Legion Jewel here. Now, the reason I use a Legion Jewel is because, as I said earlier, I really wanted permanent uptime on my Onslaught Flask. It's not something you really need, but it's like a huge QOL. So we have a really nice Legion Jewel here. Now we've got Poison Inflicts Faster, which is just a bit of QOL. We've got 25% Alchemist Genius, which is really nice. We've got medium move speed, doesn't matter. 10% flash charge gained helps a lot. And we even take this small node here for flash charge gain. It's definitely worth it. And then we've got another Alchemist Genius. So now we have a 50% chance instead of 25, which makes it a bit more consistent. So yeah, you don't need to get something like this, but I would go for flash charge gain and at least one Alchemist Genius if you can. And that will make your Flask uptime feel a little bit better. So yeah, we've got Ancestral Vision here. And we've got the Watcher's Eye with just evade hits. Now, of course, you'd want evade and you'd want Malevolence can't be bled, but that's, you know, too ideal and extremely expensive. And there wasn't any on the market last time I checked. So, yeah, we've got just the evade chance. And if you go for 1% lower, it's like half the price. So I went for 7 instead of 8. So you can do that. It's up to you guys whether you want to spend the extra divine or not. But yeah, I personally didn't really care about 1%, so I just left it. Always cheaper to go for like rolls at like 1 or 2% lower. And yeah, it's just general damage. I guess the essential nodes, make sure you have the aura mana reservation nodes. Very, very important. And yeah, just anoint Eldritch Battery if you can't afford to cast Haste with Divine Blessing. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Other than that, I would recommend dropping a little bit of life to run Eldritch Battery if you're struggling with points. That's what I had to do. And you might be worrying about the health pool, but the build isn't that squishy, so I wouldn't worry that much about it. Essential nodes, spell suppressed ones, of course, but also the Flask gain ones. They're very, very important. I would take this whole wheel as well. Just make sure you have the Flask gain, because without permanent uptime on your Flask, your resists are going to be really bad. Because at least for me, I rely heavily on my Flasks to give me resists here. You still need to go for resist on gear, but you know, it's just really, really important you have this on uptime. Otherwise, it's going to feel terrible. Even if your Flask goes down for a second, you're going to feel randomly getting one shot sometimes, and you're going to be wondering what the hell is going on. So make sure your Flasks are up. Just the main thing is the elemental Flask to be up all the time. Of course, with the Onslaught one, you can have some leeway where you don't need it to be up permanently. It can be up like 80%, 90% of the time instead. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. This took a lot longer than I expected, but yeah, my voice is starting to hurt a little bit now. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. If you like the video, like, share, and all that, and subscribe. Check out Ruetoo. He's the build creator for this build, and I'll leave his Twitch and stuff in the description. Thank you guys.